Conflict. Let's just start there. The word alone makes some people tense up. Others get defensive. Some avoid it at all costs, sweeping things under the rug until that rug looks like it's covering an entire mountain range. And then there are those who run straight into conflict like a bull charging at a red cape, swinging words like weapons. But let's be honest, both of those approaches damage relationships. Avoidance creates distance. Aggression creates wounds. And what we really want is connection. We want to solve the problem without tearing each other apart in the process. Here's the truth. Arguing is inevitable. You can't live with people, work with people, or love people without having conflict. It's not a matter of if you'll argue. It's a matter of how. And that how determines whether the relationship grows stronger after the disagreement or slowly fractures. Think about it. Some of the closest relationships you have in your life aren't close because you never fought. They're close because you did fight and then you worked through it. You had those messy conversations, you disagreed, but you found a way forward that built trust instead of breaking it. Conflict, when handled well, actually cements relationships, but handled poorly, it erodes them. So here's the shift. Stop looking at arguments as proof that something is broken. Start looking at them as opportunities to learn how to fight right. Because an argument doesn't automatically damage a relationship. What damages it is the way you show up inside that argument. And this is where most people go wrong. They think the goal is to win. They treat the conversation like a boxing match, gloves on, ready to score points, waiting for the knockout line. But in a relationship, winning the fight often means losing the person. If your goal is to crush them, silence them, or prove you're smarter, then congratulations, you may win the battle, but you just set fire to the battlefield. You might have the last word, but you won't have a healthy relationship left standing. So let's flip the script. What if the purpose of arguing wasn't about winning at all, but about understanding? What if the goal wasn't to come out on top, but to come out together? That's the first mindset shift you need if you want to argue without damaging your relationships. Shift from attack mode to curiosity mode. Curiosity doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean you just nod and smile while swallowing your feelings. Curiosity means you stop swinging and start asking. It means instead of assuming you already know why someone did what they did, you lean in and ask questions. You get curious about where they're coming from. And guess what? Curiosity cools down the heat in an argument faster than anything else. Here's an example. Let's say your partner forgets something important, a birthday, an appointment. Maybe they don't follow through on a promise. Instantly, your blood pressure spikes. You feel disrespected, forgotten. The easy response? Attack. You don't care about me. You never follow through. You're so selfish. Those words land like grenades. They don't just address the behavior, they attack the person's character. And when people feel attacked, they don't listen. They defend. They counterattack. And now you're not solving anything. You're just trading insults. But imagine if instead you took a breath and asked, hey, I was really counting on you for this, and when it didn't happen, it hurt. Can you help me understand what happened? That one phrase, help me understand, is powerful because it doesn't assume, it doesn't condemn. It opens a door instead of slamming one shut, and it invites the other person to explain instead of defend. See, most arguments escalate not because of the issue itself, but because of how we choose to handle the issue. The trigger might be small, but the explosion is fueled by ego, by assumption, by blame. Curiosity disarms that bomb. It shifts the focus from accusation to exploration. And that shift is how you argue without tearing holes in the relationship. Now, let's be real, this isn't natural. Most of us default to reacting, not reflecting. It takes practice to pause, breathe, and choose curiosity instead of combat. But the payoff, immense. You create space for dialogue instead of drama. You create the chance to actually fix the problem instead of creating 3 new ones with your words. So the first step is simple but not easy. Get curious, not combative. Shift from attack to understanding. Stop asking, how do I win this fight? And start asking, how do we walk out of this fight better than we walked in? That's the beginning. That's the foundation. And it changes everything. Now, once you've made that shift into curiosity, there's another piece you need if you're going to argue without damaging the relationship. And it's this: separate the person from the problem. This is one of the biggest mistakes people make in conflict. They fuse the two together. They confuse the problem with the person. And when you do that, you stop attacking the issue and start attacking their identity. That's why arguments spiral so quickly from "the trash didn't get taken out" to "you're lazy, you don't care, you're impossible to live with." See the difference? The first is a solvable issue. The second is an attack on character. When you blur those lines, you make the argument personal. And once it's personal, logic goes out the window. People stop hearing what you're saying. They're no longer thinking, how do we fix this? They're thinking, how do I defend myself? And that defensiveness is what makes arguments so destructive. So the discipline here, the thing that keeps relationships intact, is learning to zero in on the problem without tearing down the person. Attack the issue, not the identity. Let me paint this picture. Imagine you're in a boat with someone and suddenly water starts leaking in. The problem is the hole in the boat. But instead of both of you patching the hole, you start yelling, "This is your fault! You're terrible at rowing!" You always do this. Meanwhile, the boat is sinking. You've shifted the focus away from the actual leak and onto each other. And now, instead of working together against the problem, you're working against each other. That's what happens in most arguments. We forget the leak. We forget the real issue. And the relationship, the boat, starts sinking, not because the problem was unfixable, but because we chose blame over teamwork. So how do you stop doing that? How do you argue in a way that attacks the issue without attacking the person? You do it through language. The words you choose are the difference between gasoline and water on the fire. Instead of saying, "You're so irresponsible," you say, "When this happened, it made me feel like I couldn't rely on you." Instead of saying, "You never listen," you say, "I don't feel heard when I share my side." Notice the difference. The first phrases condemn. The second phrases communicate. One builds walls, the other opens doors. This is what I call separating character from conduct. Conduct can be addressed, challenged, changed. Character attacks. Those stick, those cut deep, and they create scars that don't fade quickly. You can resolve the problem, but the words that targeted their worth will echo long after the fight is over. And here's the thing, when you make it about the person, you limit their ability to even join you in fixing the issue. Because if the argument is, "You're lazy," how do they even prove otherwise? But if the argument is, "We need a system to keep track of responsibilities," now they can engage. They can step into the solution because the problem is clear and external. So if you want to argue without damaging the relationship, discipline yourself to see the other person as your teammate, not your target. It's the two of you against the problem, not the two of you against each other. Now let's talk about the third key. Don't argue to win, argue to understand. That's where most people go wrong in every heated exchange. They're not trying to understand. They're trying to score points. They're waiting for the other person to stop talking so they can jump in with a, "Yeah, but," or "That's not what happened," or "You always." And what happens when you play that game? Nobody wins. You might feel a tiny little victory in the moment, like you landed the perfect comeback or you shut them down, but what did you actually accomplish? You didn't move closer. You didn't build trust. You didn't create connection. You just widened the gap. Think about it. If you're having an argument with your partner and your whole focus is to win, what does that mean for them? It means they have to lose. And when they lose, they walk away resentful. They walk away feeling unheard, disrespected, dismissed. Even if you're technically right, you've damaged the relationship. And that's what I want to drill into you here. Winning an argument doesn't mean you've won. Winning in relationships is not about having the sharper tongue or the better memory or the stronger voice. Winning is when you both walk away closer, not further apart. So how do you flip this? You start with curiosity. You stop treating the argument like a courtroom battle and start treating it like a chance to understand someone you care about. When they say something that triggers you, instead of instantly defending yourself, pause. Ask yourself, why are they saying this? What's behind it? What are they really trying to get across? Most of the time, the words we argue about aren't even the real issue. They're the surface level stuff. The real emotion is underneath. Let's play this out. Your partner says, "You never listen to me." Instantly, your defenses go up, right? You want to say, "That's not true. I always listen. Remember last week when I sat with you for an hour while you talked about work?" That's the natural reflex. But that's arguing to win. That's defending. What if instead you said, "Okay, what makes you feel that way? Can you tell me when you felt like I wasn't listening?" Do you see the difference? One response escalates. The other opens the door. One makes them dig their heels in deeper. The other makes them feel like maybe, just maybe, you actually care about what they're saying. And here's the beautiful part. You don't have to agree with them to understand them. Let me repeat that because this is where a lot of people get stuck. You don't have to agree to understand. Understanding isn't the same as surrendering. It doesn't mean you're saying, "You're right, I'm wrong." It means you're saying, "I hear you. I see why this matters to you. I'm trying to get where you're coming from." That alone disarms so much of the tension. Picture it this way: every time you argue, you're both standing on opposite sides of a canyon yelling at each other across the gap. Arguing to win means you stay on your side and you just try to shout louder. Arguing to understand means you build a bridge. You walk toward the middle. You say, "Let me cross this canyon and stand next to you for a second. Let me see the view from your side." That doesn't mean you abandon your side. It just means you're willing to see both perspectives before you decide how to move forward. Let me give you a real-world example from a couple I worked with. They'd been married 10 years, constant fighting. And when I asked them to describe their arguments, do you know what they said? "It feels like we're both on trial all the time. Like every fight is about proving who's guilty and who's innocent." And that's exhausting. That's not a marriage, that's a courtroom. No wonder they were tired. But when we reframed it, when I asked them to stop trying to win and instead start asking each other, "What do you need me to understand right now?" the shift was incredible. They stopped tallying up each other's mistakes like lawyers. They started listening like teammates, and slowly the resentment started melting. Now, I know some of you are thinking, "Jefferson, that sounds nice, but what if they're wrong? What if they're just flat out wrong?" Here's the truth: sometimes they are. Sometimes people get it wrong. Sometimes they say things that aren't accurate or they remember differently. But here's the kicker: if your first instinct is to correct them, to tell them they're wrong, you've already lost the emotional battle. Because in that moment, what matters more than the facts is the feeling. If your partner feels dismissed, it doesn't matter that you were technically right. What matters is that they feel safe enough to tell you how they feel. And if you can give them that safety, you can deal with the facts later. When you argue, one of the easiest mistakes to make is assuming that the louder you are, the stronger your point becomes. But here's the truth: the loudest voice in the room isn't the one people remember. The clearest voice is, the calmest voice is, the voice that shows discipline, not desperation. Think about the last time you were in an argument and your voice started climbing, your heart raced, your hands may be clenched. You could feel your temperature rise. And in that moment, the only thing you cared about was being heard. But the irony, the louder you got, the less the other person listened. The more forceful you became, the more defensive they got. It's like pushing on a locked door. It doesn't open, it pushes back. This is where so many relationships, romantic, family, professional, start to take damage. Not because the disagreement itself was catastrophic, but because the delivery turned hostile. Because instead of inviting dialogue, the tone created walls. When your words are coated in fire, people don't lean in, they step back. And I want you to really hear this. It's not about how much power you can throw at someone. It's about how much control you can maintain over yourself. That's the real power in an argument. Self-control doesn't make you weak. It doesn't mean you're letting someone steamroll you. It means you've trained yourself not to get dragged into the mud, and instead you stay grounded. Now, here's the practical part. The next time you feel that volume rising, I want you to test something. Instead of pushing your voice higher, lower it. Bring it down. Not to a whisper, but to a level that forces the other person to lean in, to actually listen. Because when you bring your tone down, you shift the energy. You stop feeding the fire. You actually reset the pace of the conversation. This is one of the hardest things to practice, but it's also one of the most effective. Why? Because it communicates. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to solve this. And when you approach an argument with that posture, it shifts from a war to a negotiation, from a boxing match to a conversation. That's how you protect your relationships while still standing firm. Let me tell you a story. I had a client once who told me that she and her husband would always escalate. Small disagreements about chores or money would spiral into screaming matches. And she said, "Jefferson, I don't know why we can't stop ourselves. It feels like the second one of us raises our voice, the other has to match it. And it just keeps building." So I gave her this exercise. I said, the next time you feel it climbing, take one deep breath. Lower your tone by half and don't match his volume. Keep yours steady. She looked at me like, that'll never work. He'll just keep yelling. But you know what happened. The next time it started, she stayed calm. And at first, yes, he kept yelling. But then he noticed she wasn't feeding into it. She wasn't matching his energy. And slowly, he came down too. See, that's the thing, escalation needs fuel. If one person removes the fuel, the fire burns out faster. And it's not about manipulation. It's about leadership. It's about being the one who decides, I'm not going to let this moment destroy our connection. Because at the end of the day, every argument has two parts, the issue and the delivery. The issue might matter, but the delivery decides whether you come out stronger or weaker together. So I want you to write this in your notes, on your mirror, in your phone, volume down, clarity up. That's the rule. Because when you bring your voice down, you make space for understanding. And when you bring your clarity up, you actually give the other person something they can work with instead of just noise they're trying to dodge. Now, let's talk about clarity, because staying calm is only half the battle. The other half is being precise. How many times have you gotten into a fight and halfway through you don't even remember what you're arguing about anymore? It started with one small thing, but then it snowballed into 5 other unrelated frustrations, and suddenly you're both buried under a mountain of grievances. That's what happens when clarity gets lost. The trick: stick to the point. Stick to one thing. If the fight started about dishes, don't drag last week's vacation or your mother-in-law into it. If the disagreement is about money, don't suddenly jump into who texts back faster. Every extra layer you add makes the conversation messier, harder to resolve, and more likely to cause lingering resentment. Here's a phrase you can use when clarity starts to slip. Let's stick with one thing at a time. Simple. Direct. It puts a guardrail back on the conversation. It signals, I'm not ignoring your feelings, but if we want to actually resolve this, we have to take it one step at a time. Here's another practical tip for humility in arguments. Start by owning your slice of the pie. Even if you believe 95% of the problem is the other person's fault, grab hold of your 5% and say, okay, I'll own this piece right here. I didn't communicate well. I was harsh in my tone. I brought this up at the wrong time. When you lead with accountability, you create space for the other person to do the same. But when you refuse to own anything, you force them into defense mode, and then it's just two walls colliding. And let me tell you something powerful. Sometimes the biggest win in an argument isn't winning the point. It's protecting the relationship. That doesn't mean you don't talk about what matters. That doesn't mean you sweep issues under the rug. It means you learn to fight in a way that doesn't cost you the connection you're fighting to protect. I've said this before, but it's worth repeating here. Arguments don't destroy relationships. Disrespect does. Pride does. Ego does. The unwillingness to soften, to listen, to admit fault, that's what erodes the foundation, and humility is the antidote. Humility is what makes your partner or your friend or your coworker feel safe enough to stay in the conversation with you, even when it's hard. So here's my challenge to you. The next time you find yourself in the middle of a heated moment, stop and ask yourself, what matters more right now, being right or being connected? And if the answer is connection, then put down your weapons. Choose humility. Say, help me understand your side. Own your slice of the pie, and watch how quickly the temperature in the room changes. Because here's the truth, humility doesn't make you smaller in an argument. It makes you bigger. It shows you have the strength to lead with grace, the courage to admit you're human, and the wisdom to prioritize love over ego. And if you want to argue without damaging your relationships, humility is the tool that will get you there every single time. So don't be afraid to use it. Don't be afraid to be the first one to lay down your pride, because the person who chooses humility isn't the weaker one in the room. They're the strongest. And let me leave you with this. Winning an argument will give you a moment of satisfaction, but protecting your relationship will give you a lifetime of connection. Choose wisely.